1. So this happened in 2012, and it's always stuck with me. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since, and I've got no theories or answers. In 2012, I was 19 years old, lived in Philly, and I saved up enough money to visit my friend in Los Angeles. I decided to take the train there and back. I went alone. I had never traveled outside of the tri-state area before, never had any family vacations, nothing. I did not then, nor do I now, maintain any social media accounts. I had a flip phone. I knew exactly 2 people in LA, my friend and her boyfriend, who had both just moved there and knew next to nobody in the area. And yes, I promise this background info is relevant to the story. I spent 4 days on the train with complete strangers, and when I spoke with some of them on smoke breaks, we didn't exchange names. When we arrived in LA, I got off the train and headed out to the street, only to realize I'd left my camera on the train. I ran like hell back to the platform, luckily managed to grab the camera, and started to walk back out onto the street. I was carrying only a backpack and the camera, nothing with luggage tags or any identifying tags whatsoever. On my way out, a young woman came my way walking towards the boarding platforms. I'd never seen her before in my life. She was petite, about my age or maybe a few years older, and wearing a purple hijab. Only relevant because at that point in my life I hadn't yet made any Muslim friends, and none ran in my social circle at the time. She smiled at me as she was about to pass me and said, "Hey Sarah." I smiled too, kinda confused, and apologized and asked if I knew her. She said, word for word, "Nope, I just believe in all that Terminator shit," and just walked off. My friend arrived at the station to pick me up half an hour later, and I immediately asked if she had had one of her friends prank me. My friend knew no one who fit this woman's description, and neither did her boyfriend. It's also impossible that she had been on the same train as I had, as she was clearly departing, not arriving, and was heading towards an entirely different boarding platform than the one I had just left. I don't know, guys, I've got nothing. No idea what she could have meant about Terminator shit, aside from some reference to the movie. I'd love to hear some thoughts. I never told anyone about this in real life because it's just, well, odd. And not really suggestive of anything that I can think of. Unless I'm actually Sarah Connor. Who knows? 2. So this happened to me about a year or so ago. My wife and I had both been seeing a family therapist who was helping us deal with personal issues. My wife at the time was diagnosed with major depression, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I was trying to overcome a mild addiction I formed as a coping mechanism. Won't say what the addiction was, just something I wanted to get rid of and have control over. One of the biggest things our therapist taught us was to communicate more and more whenever we were feeling depressed, or feeling urges to relapse, and that communication with a loved one helps tremendously to calm down and get oneself back into a logical thinking state. One afternoon, while my wife was at work, she did food deliveries, still does sometimes. I start feeling those urges again, so I decide to call my wife. She answers and we start talking. She tells me she's been feeling depressed all day and was happy to get a call from me. I let her know what's happening with me and we talk it out. We then talk for about 20 minutes, sharing intimate details about our day, progress in counseling, and random things about the day before. She thanks me for letting her know I was struggling and suggests that I go out for a walk. Exercise and fresh air also help tremendously to clear up one's mind and get into a logical thinking state, so I think it's a great idea. I ask her if we can stay on the phone since I haven't talked to her all day. She left early before I woke up, and she agrees. So we just continue talking as I'm getting dressed, when suddenly her line goes dead quiet. No white noise or anything, just complete silence. I say hello? A few times. No answer. Thinking maybe she accidentally muted herself. Her phone is a little broken and sometimes the screen doesn't turn off, so she'll accidentally mute the phone with her face. I say, "Hey, hon, I think you might have muted your mic on accident," thinking she could still hear me if that was the case. A few seconds after I said that, I start hearing her voice again, but really broken up. Then more silence. Then the phone hangs up. I figure she must have been driving through a busy part of our town or a tunnel, and the phone disconnected. Even though the phone didn't say there was a disconnection, I try calling her back. No answer. I wait a few minutes and try again, no answer. I thought it was a little strange, but thought nothing more of it and went for my walk. A few minutes into my walk, I get a text from her saying, "How's it going?" So I call her back and she finally answers. I ask her what happened and she seemed confused. I asked her if her phone got disconnected and she says, "I haven't had any disconnections today, why?" At this point I'm a little confused, and so I clarify if she got disconnected from our phone conversation. My wife sounds completely baffled. She said I'd never called her, and that she had just texted me to know how I was doing. Suddenly I felt these chills run down from the top of my head and all over the rest of my body, and I start feeling this extreme sense of uneasiness. Freaked out, I pull up my phone history to make sure I wasn't going crazy, and sure enough, I find our conversation there, timestamped and everything. I tell her I'm looking at our phone call in my phone history, and she insists I have never called her, and she starts freaking out. She comes home later that day, and I check her phone. I pull up both of our phone histories side by side, and sure enough, there was no incoming phone call from me at the first time I called her. I tap on my phone's call history to dial her number to see who it would call, and her phone rings. We both look at each other, and I feel a huge chill down my spine. Who had I talked to? Who had I had a personal and intimate phone conversation with? There's no way it could have been anyone except my wife. Had I somehow had a phone conversation with a parallel dimension version of my wife or something? This was one of the craziest and freakiest things I ever had happen to me. We have both gotten new phones since then, and this has never happened again, if anyone is wondering. I had an iPhone 6s Plus and she had an iPhone 6s, both overdue for an upgrade. 3. Very useful kitchen tools exist in everyday life, from the sponge to the garbage disposal. The sink sprayer is such a tool that I've used often in my life, like the rest of these tools. Quite useful if you're trying to get that last bit of food off a plate before you put it in the dishwasher. This occurrence just happened an hour and a half ago. Background information. I have lived in my current house for 2 years with 2 roommates. This is key for later. The kitchen is small but functional. It has a 2-compartment standard sink. I don't use mind-altering substances and do not drink very often. I didn't drink before this happened either, as I just got home from work. I've never been diagnosed with any mental illness issues as well. I do believe in the supernatural, but this doesn't fit with anything I've experienced or heard before, other than on the internet. I've used this sink for hand washing, cleaned many dishes and put them in the dishwasher, and wiped down this sink many times during the last 2 years. The sink itself, as I remembered it, had no other outlets next to the faucet valve. As mentioned, I've used a sink sprayer often in my life, and this ranges from childhood homes in years past to a friend's house in the last year. I prefer using these sprayers. However, I remember using the faucet a lot on various dishes 2 days ago. I use a sponge to get the excess food off. It's been like that for 2 years. Today, as I was preparing my dinner, I was standing in front of the sink and noticed a sink sprayer I have never seen before the entire time I've lived in this house. I just stand there, just staring at it. I look at details of it to see if it's new, but it looks like it's been there for a while. My roommate was in the living room watching Netflix about 8 feet away from me. I ask him, "Hey, did you install a sprayer in the sink recently?" He goes, "Have you never seen that, ever? It's been like 2 years. Then he goes back to watching Netflix. I go back in the kitchen and keep studying the sprayer closer. At this point, I keep thinking of other posts and wonder if this has finally happened to me. I just stare at it. The hose attachment is grey with a usual chrome finish for the sprayer. It's separate from the faucet. I keep thinking that I know I would have used this sprayer in the last 2 years. I remember the surface of the back of the sink being mostly flat. I remember cleaning the back portion of it often. I never cleaned the sprayer and never used it to clean the sink out because that would have been much easier. I just use a sponge and water and soap and dry it with a towel. I start to panic inside just a little. I text my other roommate, "Have we always had this?" "I've never used it, and I know I would have if we had." And then post a picture of the sprayer, then clarify again, the rinser. About 5 minutes later, she texts back, "No, recently." Other roommate, "Got it. I can't use regular soap." She then texts back to clarify, "Oh, yes, it's been there." I text back, "Oh my." She texts again, "Certainly useful." I text more, "It's never been there since I've been here that I remember. This is weird. Other roommate said it's been there the whole time too." I then apologize because I'm thinking I may sound crazy for texting this. "Sorry. Maybe my memory is playing tricks with me. I don't know." She texts back, "Twilight Zone." I respond, "It's true." I was really hoping that she never saw the sprayer before, but no, it was just me. I realize either my vision or memory in the last 2 years has failed me, or this sprayer just appeared and I'm the only one in the house that has never used it or seen it before. Like it just appeared there within the last day. I still find this odd. If the sprayer disappears or something else, I will update. I know this is just a small occurrence, but it still weirds me out. Was this just me having no memory of this sprayer? Did this sprayer appear from nowhere? Or did I transport to another, almost exact dimension with an extra sprayer? Hellfreezer's note. I've done another story in the past that did actually involve a similar situation. The couple had been in the house for years, and one day, suddenly, there's a sprayer on the sink that they do not recognize. 4. About 2 years ago, I drove out to Colorado with my friend. He had driven back to Pennsylvania alone to visit his family, and I offered to join his ride back so he wasn't alone for that too. He picked me up at the Harrisburg airport, where I left my car with the plan of getting back home, spending a day or so there, then flying back to my car. We made the 26 to 28 hour journey, me driving about 10 hours straight at the end. I recall having a good time, then getting into an argument right before I left. Instead of my friend driving me to the airport, I ended up taking an Uber or Lyft. Nothing serious, we're still friends. I think we were just cranky and tired. Anyway, it was the most interesting Uber or Lyft ride I've ever had. The conversations about AI, genetic modification, quantum mechanics, etc. was not what I expect at 5 a.m. It all felt surreal. The parting words of that man I can't remember verbatim, but they were along the lines of, "The connections between some of us are all the proof we need to know there is something beyond this reality." Anyway, my brother is a pilot, so I always fly as a non-rev flyer, meaning I don't pay for the ticket, and if someone else books the flight last minute, I lose my seat. Something happened, and I had to take a flight with a layover instead of straight back home. This stop was in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where my brother flies out of and lives. Unfortunately, I already knew he was working that day and wouldn't be around, so I didn't even bother contacting him to let him know. When I get to North Carolina, something odd happens as I get off the plane. It was like a big drop of water got in my eye and things looked distorted. It got worse as I walked through the gate and into the airport. I couldn't see out of my left eye. Well, I could, but it just looked like indiscernible colors and light distortion. I had never had this happen and had never been to this airport, so I didn't know where I was going, plus it was packed, and people were rushing around me as I started to panic. I didn't know where my next flight was, where any airport maps were. I was starting to lose the vision in my other eye, and it was just downright scary for me. But something told me to just walk forward a bit longer. Within maybe a minute, I hear my name called. Right ahead of me, I barely see my brother. My brother's schedule was changed last minute that day. He flew back from, I want to say Dayton, Ohio, but I don't remember. Made it out to his car, which for him takes 15 to 20 minutes due to having to take shuttles and such, and was driving out of the parking lot when something told him to go back in. He said he wasn't sure why, and he didn't know exactly what was going on. He just knew to go back in and walk toward where our paths crossed. He had bought a 1-liter water bottle right before I got there. I vaguely recall him saying he thought he was dehydrated, and that's why he was acting strange, which almost immediately calmed me down and helped keep my right eye from going. The cold and hydration really helps with any anxiety or panic for me. He held my arm, got me to his car, and took me to his place so I could sit in the dark and rest until my eyes went back to normal. I was able to get on a flight later and get home. I haven't had that type of ocular episode since, and I haven't had an optometrist notice anything wrong with me. Also, as an added thing, my family isn't close. We love each other, but I go months without talking to my siblings. Just how we are. The brother in this story is 7.5 years older than me, so we didn't really bond much growing up. This just happened. 5. 7 years ago, my friend and I walked to a 7-Eleven type store with some quarters to get snacks. We each bought one of those oval honey bun pastry things for 69 cents each. Mine had icing and his did not. We also bought one 5-pack of those little Hostess donut things. We paid in quarters and walked around the back of the place outside and sat on a little stone structure bench type thing at the back of the empty lot the store was located on. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes and ate our snacks. We ate everything, then stood up to walk back to his house. Then we went to grab our wrappers from our snacks to throw them away, which we had placed right between us, on the one stone bench thing. We instantly noticed that there were now 4 honey bun wrappers. 2 were iced, like mine, and 2 were not iced, like his. As soon as we noticed this, we were both so overwhelmed with cognitive dissonance that we just started laughing and freaking out. We were honestly in shock. Now you're probably thinking one of a few things. Number 1, we both bought and ate 2, but didn't remember for whatever reason. This is impossible. We immediately dug the receipt out of the trash can outside the store, and saw that we only had 2. Also, what are the chances that we would have a shared lapse in memory? And I remembered counting out the quarters to pay for what we got. Number 2, it was a coincidence, and the exact snack wrappers, both icing and without, were already sitting on the bench and we just didn't notice when we sat down. Okay, this would be an astronomical coincidence first. Also, I'm telling you that we would have noticed when we sat down. And the lot we were sitting in had only one Dunkin' Donuts cup sitting maybe 15 feet away as far as trash lying around. We surveyed hard for explanations. Number 3, we must have been on drugs. No, this was before I ever smoked or took anything. We were 18. Number 4, somebody snuck up behind us and planted the trash. Or a plane dropped it from overhead while we were sitting there. Both are insanely improbable and almost impossible. I know that sounds crazy. A glitch in the Matrix sounds less crazy than that. There were absolutely no people around when this happened besides us. And to our backs was a wide open empty field next to a small airport. The only thing that did happen was a sedan with all tinted windows drove in the lot and turned right around in front of us as we were eating, which was weird, but I digress. Number 5, the pastries we bought both happened to be double wrapped and we didn't notice. When we examined all the wrappers, they were all torn open in different ways, and each had residue on the inside from contact with the pastry. This rules out that explanation. I have a picture on my old iPhone from the time of all 4 wrappers. Number 6, it just didn't happen the way I'm describing. There is some obvious oversight or left out information. This is what people seem to think anytime I try to describe it. It is simply so unbelievable that you just had to be there to believe it. To this day, I'll ask my friend who was there what he thinks happened, and see if he has any theories. He is still baffled. He is very intelligent and now a successful engineer. The day this happened, we just sat around theorizing and laughing out of astonishment. We spent an hour or 2 and came to the conclusion, basically, that we have today. There was a legitimate glitch in the Matrix that is reality. Whatever kind of mathematical coding or programming order of any sort which makes up the universe malfunctioned. But the interesting part of this theory is the fact that whatever glitch took place only duplicated a mundane inanimate object, trash. Not a single atom within a cell. Not a human being. Not a car. If this was truly a glitch that we witnessed, it would reveal something about our reality. that objects are programmed intentionally in their full form. I know I'm sounding crazy. I kicked myself that we didn't think to go inside the store and ask the guy if we could see the security footage from behind the store where we were sitting. A long shot, but could have had definitive video evidence potentially. I sometimes drive by the place these days, but the building is now under construction and being turned into a hair salon or something. That bench we sat at is still there, however. This was the craziest thing that has ever happened in my life, and I will probably go to my grave not having any real idea what happened. Again, I left out no real details, so feel free to give me your own theories. Occam's razor is hard to apply, as there's really no logical explanation for this, and any coincidence would seem less likely than a glitch in reality, honestly. 6. As a bit of background, I'm 41, live in Bedford, England. I was born in the Netherlands as my father at the time was working for Prime Computers over there. Both my parents are what I like to call original techies from the time when computers took up a whole room, and most of the time several rooms. We moved back to England when I was 6, and from then on I grew up in a fairly quiet bit of the suburbs in Bedford, playing in the park and messing about in the woods near home. Now, I know this story may drag on with a little pointless information about unrelated events, but I feel like it's important. This happened to me when I was about 9 or 10. I may even have been older, but I remember it was before I went to upper school at 13. I also remember quite a bit about the specifics of the stuff we had in our living room at the time. When we moved back to England, my dad bought a rather large black, at the time, Philips TV. It was pretty good, had 12 channels, and was what we used back when we only had 3 channels to choose from in the UK. I remember also that my dad had to get a replacement tuner board for the TV to make it work for us in the UK. There are 2 odd things that happened with this TV, and I cannot remember the order of them, and they are not really linked, but for some reason I always seem to connect them. There was one day when a bunch of my friends were round the house, and we'd been watching TV and doing the usual kid stuff. It must have been during summer holidays. Then a rather large thunderstorm rolled across. Being the paranoid 80s, and also that electronic equipment was more sensitive to those things, my mother came in and turned the TV off, disconnecting the aerial socket as she did. We were all a little disappointed by this, but this storm was getting pretty loud and impressive, so we were all watching through the front window. We all did the usual counting of lightning versus thunder, and the storm grew nearer and nearer until we were only 1 second between flash and thunder. Then, with the loudest thunder crack I've ever heard, the front window shook, and we all leapt back from the window. Later, once the storm had passed, we reconnected the TV to find that it was not working properly. Now, if you remember, I said the TV had 12 channel buttons, 3 rows of 4. So now when you pressed 1, the TV would flick to 9. If you pressed 2, it went to 10, and so on. No matter what, we could not get it working. My parents really didn't care either. It was only years later, when we had a small leak in the roof, that we found a cracked tile, pretty much directly over where the power line to the TV is on the wall. Like I say, I still don't know why I connect these 2 incidents, but I do. Later down the line, the TV also developed a strange twitch in the picture, where the sides would bulge inwards, usually solved by a whack to the top. Ah, the joy of CRT TVs. This would ultimately be its demise when the picture turned into a single thin line. Now, the really odd part is, one evening, we were all sat watching something on the TV. I can't remember what we were watching, but all of my family, me, sister, mom, and dad were watching. This is slightly unusual, as my father worked away from home for most of my childhood, so I only saw him at weekends. So, we're watching what we were watching, and the commercials come on and the couple roll. Then, in the middle of the next one, the screen goes fuzzy. It all changes, and there on the screen is the image of a futuristic-looking news desk, complete with a female newscaster, sporting a rather fetching electronic eyepiece, not unlike a Google Glass kind of thing. Clothing I did not recognize, and a backdrop of what looked like a space station. I cannot remember exactly what was said at this point, but one thing sticks in my mind to this day. I don't know if anyone will be able to hear me. This is my first attempt at sending a message into the past. She went on to explain something about the technology, and then finished up by saying that they would try again on another date. I wish I could remember what that date was. Then the transmission was done, and the program comes back on, no title card. No banner, and we're in. In the UK, this is odd, as pretty much every show would have a little title banner before and after the ads. I assumed at the time that this was a trailer for some program that was coming up, but there was no banner about a show or anything. Just the woman talking to the camera, no text, no announcements. I mentioned this to my family many times and none of them could remember this happening. I watch a lot of sci-fi, especially obscure 70s and 80s movies and TV, so I would have thought I would have seen it again. I have even searched the IMDb quotes and other available things online. I've even asked people if they remember a scene like this in a movie, but nothing. Nothing in the last 30-ish years. Something about it still feels odd to me, and I cannot remember the important bit at the end where they said when the next transmission would be. I have a vague recollection that she even mentioned about how to contact them back. I was young, and I did not understand it. 7. Last Wednesday night, myself, my husband, and his friend Jay were outside in the summer night, just enjoying the breeze and quiet. My husband had told me earlier that Jay wanted to take his new car for a drive, in his words, bend some corners. I was pretty much like, okay. Not really wanting him to go with Jay, but hey, to me, bend some corners can mean like a 5-minute drive. I was already a bit on edge because Jay had been drinking, and I hate drunk drivers because, well, that's a whole other story. Anyways, my husband and his friend left, and I decided to go in the house. After 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I began to have this uneasy feeling. I decided to go outside and await their arrival. As I sat in the dark, I began to feel an even heavier feeling of dread. I texted my husband and no answer. Then I called, still no answer. The second time I called, he did answer. "Babe, are y'all okay?" "Yes, on our way back, we're in Ferndale." Now at this time I'm pissed. Ferndale is about 30 minutes away from where we live, and you have to go on the freeway to get there. I expressed my attitude towards him via text, and he replied with the, "Well, I'm not driving" excuse. Yeah. So I go back in the house and wait. About 40 minutes later, they pull up. And I was even more mad because by now it's 2 a.m., and instead of coming in the house, he decided to stay outside and talk the shit with Jay and drink some more. Now here is where it gets weird. Where my window is in my room, it's right down from the front porch where they were sitting at. So I'm in the window, listening to see what they're talking about. That was so important. I know, crazy, right? Anyways, I hear them saying something about witnessing a car crash, going to help one of the guys to check if he was alive. When it was confirmed, the other driver of the crash got out of his car and started beating on the one who was injured. Then my husband and Jay left before the police came, or the violent man decided to beat them too. After all, there were other witnesses and a couple of them called the cops. Well, after a while, my husband came in the house and went to bed. Fast forward to 5 days later, Monday. So Monday morning, all on the news, they were talking about how early Monday morning, a man was beaten to death after being in a car crash. As I heard of this news, my stomach felt like I was going to vomit. I decided to fess up to my husband about eavesdropping in his conversation the other night with his friend, and overheard him talk about the situation, and saying how it was weird that the same thing happened to him when they were out on Wednesday night. He then tells me that the conversation never happened, the situation never happened. I'm confused, like, what? I heard it with my own 2 ears. I was not asleep, and they were loud and clear. He still said it never happened. So later Monday morning I asked Jay about it, and he also claimed he never heard of such a thing. WTF. Did I have a glitch in time? A switch in timelines? A temporary fit of going nuts? I don't know. I'm still so confused. I've been looking into trying to find information about an accident that happened last Wednesday. but no trace of it anywhere. What the hell? 8. Okay, so first the boring bit. I am a 50-year-old medical professional. I keep myself relatively fit. As in, my body isn't exactly a temple, but neither is it a chapel of rest. I've never done drugs. I have the odd beer now and then, but not to excess. There are no psychological or neurological problems. There is no high EMF in my house, neither is there any black mold, nor do I live on a ley line or any other thing I have seen as an excuse I sometimes see in the comments on other posts. I'm not saying these are invalid, I just mean that they do not pertain to my situation. I have an exceptional memory, a scientific and an analytical mind that fits perfectly with my chosen career path. However, I also have an esoteric side that I keep personal and apart from my working life. Please note, all the names of people and hospital names have been changed for privacy's sake. I have had strange incidences or glitches that have happened to me all through my life. In hindsight, I can remember a clockwork train set I used to have. I remember playing with it, and it was my prized possession. However, my family insist I never had such a thing. I grew up a little, and blindly shrugged off life's little coincidences, like finding a key right where everyone else had looked, until when I first noticed one summer's day that my friend's front door, which I knew was blue, was suddenly one day white. Not a newly painted white, but a peeling white paint that cried out for a new coat of shiny paint. "I thought your door was blue," I said to my friend. He gave me a puzzled look. "It's been white ever since we moved here," he replied. Confused by this, I raised the matter with my best friend and the wisest man I knew, my father. We used to stay up late some nights in his study just talking about lots of different things, ghosts, time travel, parallel universes. Yes, folks, we used to talk about these things even in the black and white days of the 80s, before the interweb. In fact, we spoke about anything and everything. I swear that guy never tired of chatting. I brought up the case of the door that was now white, and he thought it was very interesting, as he, too, had had moments where he could have sworn he had put his keys down somewhere, only to find them again in the strangest of places, or a time when he knew for a fact that a shop he used was on one side of the street, and was suddenly on the other. "It's funny," he said, "but once you have noticed it for the first time, you will only notice things more often." This proved to be very true indeed, and all the way through school, university, and work, I have checked myself now and then as I have noticed small, inexplicable changes in the everyday things around me, small and unobtrusive, until last week. I work in the field of anesthesia, and I trained at a large hospital in London. After I qualified, I stayed working there for a while, working in my favorite anesthetic genre, trauma and acute theatre. I really liked working at that hospital. Operating theatres are very insular. They are well removed from the usual everyday humdrum of the hospital, and as such, the theatre staff are a very close team that gel and work well together. And although the days were full of hard work, we all enjoyed our time. I had been there about 6 months when one of the theatre nurses, Jill, announced she was leaving and moving out of London. Needless to say, we were all pretty disappointed. She was a great scrub nurse. All scrub nurses have very individual ways of setting up their kit. This is relevant, so bear with me. They are an integral part of the team, and to be perfectly honest, she was also exceptionally hot. Even in surgical blues that normally do nothing for any figure. Jill's final day came along, and we had the usual leaving tea and cakes, etc. And after work, we all went out on the town to see her off in style. It was a great party at the Stargazy Tavern. The Stargazy was a pub right opposite the hospital doors, and was normally stuffed to the rafters with hospital staff. This was followed by a pub crawl around the best bars in London, and after she had gone, we talked for a fair few weeks about how good Jill's leaving do had been. Time passed, and after a year I decided to spread my wings and travel and work my way around the planet. And so, after another leaving do, I left London for good. I was pretty fortunate, landing posts all over the place, but mostly in Australia and New Zealand. And I had many years abroad until the old homesickness began to take its toll, and I decided to return back to the UK, where I landed a job at a large hospital in the north of England. I started work, and after a while I was pleased to find it was my first day in the acutes theatre. I was just checking my anesthetic machine when I looked up straight into the face of Jill. "Good God," I exclaimed, taken aback. "Hi, Jill." She looked surprised with my familiarity. "Who are you?" she asked. "It's me, Dave Wilkes." "Oh," she said. "Are you the new gas man?" "Yeah," I replied cautiously. Okay, it had been 20 years, but I never forget a face. Especially the face of someone I had worked with, and even fancied for a while. She was a little older looking, but hey, so was I. And I put her not recognizing me down to that. "Here's the list," she said, handing me a piece of paper with the day's cases on it. "We're ready to go when you are." And with that, she hurried off to find some equipment that was needed for the first case. And I was left holding a piece of paper and staring at my anesthetic machine, having a serious WTF moment. We worked together for a few days, and at every moment I expected her to suddenly have a light bulb moment and remember me. But she didn't say a word or even bring up the subject of where we worked before, and I could see that I would have to find an opportune moment to say something, and it wasn't long before that came along. The charge nurse of the theatre was happily telling me about each member of the team one day between cases. "That's Jimmy. He's worked here forever. And that's Jill. She's a great nurse." "Yeah," I butted in quickly. "I worked with Jill at Waterloo Hospital." Jill suddenly had a curious look on her face. Here it comes, I thought, as if I could see the cogs moving in her brain. "Any second now." "Did you work at Waterloo?" "I don't remember you." I have to admit I was a bit hurt by this. "Yeah, I went to your leaving do at the Stargazy Tavern." She thought for a moment. "Yeah, I remember my leaving do, but I'm sorry I really can't remember you." "What years did you work there?" "I left about a year after you in 1998. I left in 1991. I must have looked like a crazy mad thing for a few seconds, as I just stood there with my mouth open. But I remember you. You set up your instruments differently because you're left-handed, and I actually went to your leaving do. You left to get married to move out of London." She furrowed her brow and asked, "What was my maiden name?" I thought for a moment. Then I had it. "Spencer, Jill Spencer." You could hear a pin drop in the theatre for a few moments until she breathed. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I worked with you," I exclaimed, granted a bit more forceful than I normally would have, but I was confused and even a little worried about what I was hearing. "I signed your leaving card and brought a lemon drizzle cake for your leaving tea." Needless to say, we both looked puzzled at each other for quite a long while, until the moment was interrupted by the obligatory surgeon bursting in to exclaim he had an emergency he had to work on, and so we went back to the grindstone. After work, I sent messages to my old colleagues on Facebook. "Hi, Mick, do you remember Jill Spencer? We used to work with her at the Waterloo." And a little while later I got the reply, "Never heard of her, mate." Each time my phone bleeped with a message, my gut wrenched further and further as each replied with variances of, "Nope, who's that?" and "Sorry, no," etc. My head whirled with confusion. These messages were from all the guys that worked in the team back in '98. A close-knit team that could read each other's thoughts. And I know they were also at her leaving do with me. And yet, no one could remember her. In the end, I resorted to sending a friend request to the old theatre manager at Waterloo, and who had retired 10 years previously. Thankfully, he accepted, and I sent him a message asking about Jill. "Yeah, I remember Jill. Thank God," I thought to myself for a moment, and then I read further. "Haven't heard from her in years. She left in either 90 or 91. You must have still been in school. How do you know her?" I sat stunned for a long while, trying to make sense of it all, but even now, a week later, I am still completely stumped. I even began to doubt myself. Maybe I had seen her picture in the theatre department, or heard people talk about her, and my brain had formulated some bizarre fantasy woven into the everyday working life of the theatre, but no. How could I know her working style? How could I know her voice and personality? An impossible paradox that must be outside this realm of consciousness. Then I remembered my father's words. Once you've noticed it for the first time, you will only notice things more often. And somehow these words have given me comfort. Incidences, glitches, updates, Mandela effect, whatever you want to call them, are just a strange part of life, things that are impossible to change or avoid. Maybe we are all living inside a matrix or computer simulation, and as the population of the planet grows, so the program struggles to keep up. But for those of us that recognize these changes, consider that you yourselves are truly exceptional and gifted in your ability. 9. When I was younger, around the age of 5th grade, I went to my friend's house to spend the night. This friend, Mark, had a pool in his backyard and my only friend to have one. When I stayed the night at his house, our favorite thing to do was swim at night with the lights off. I still enjoy swimming at night, not sure why. Anyways, in his backyard there are very few trees, just taller fences with one tree cluster, and 3 against the back left corner of his medium-sized backyard. The pool took up most of it, and there was a very tiny, maybe 9x9 covered patio next to it on the right side of the backyard, facing outside the back door of a 2-story house. The trees in the corner were only tall enough to give some privacy. But the cool thing about it was the moon would sometimes look like it's perched up at the top of the middle tree. After a while of being at his house and staying the night all the time, you get used to seeing it there. Anyways, as we were taking turns jumping into the deep end, where the trees are located, I am getting out of the pool using only the light of the moon to see the steps. As I get to the top of the steps, I had this strange feeling like I was being watched, and I knew exactly where to look, which was over the back side of the backyard, between the 2-story houses between my friends. Once I looked in that direction, my eyes focused on a large green ball that was just floating. It was sparking, and they were shooting off, but the sparks flowed like a gas in a spinning motion. It was so close to me, I could tell it was floating about 40 or 50 feet above the street behind my friend's house. The moment I shouted to my friend to look at what I was seeing, it shot up into the air in an arch motion, as if it were thrown, but it didn't go to a height that any person could throw, or would be up at 1 a.m. throwing super bright balls of gas like a bad neighbor would. The brightness was about that of someone's old headlights. Anyways, my friend doesn't see it, and I start freaking out a bit, but I'm more confused than scared at what I just saw. As I turn my back to go to the deep end again and jump in, my friend calls to look because he sees something. And sure enough, there it is, shooting back down from a great height, and just fades out from existence. My friend and I are both amazed by what we're seeing, and don't feel scared at all. We continue to jump into the pool a couple of times, and swim around for about another 30 to 45 minutes. As we continue to float in my friend's pool, we chat to each other about the crap kids talk about. He was my best friend, so obviously we talked a lot. That's when the water stopped moving entirely. It was disturbingly still, to the point where it felt like I might be in trouble. All of the neighbors' air conditioners to their homes turned off in unison. It seemed as if everyone's power was shut off. But that wouldn't make a pool stop moving. As I am sitting in the deep end, I look at the back left corner where my friend is floating, and where the moon was that night above the trees as usual. The moon makes a quick jolt up, already facing it. I just need to look up a tiny bit further, immediately catching my attention. It shoots off in the same direction as the Green Inferno, and changes into its exact color pattern as it leaves. The moon was never there that night, and the backyard of his house turned completely dark. My friend and I both agreed to leave the pool, which was not moving, and go inside. We stayed up the whole night and moved on. I told the story a couple of times to some friends, but I guess now I have it written. I haven't spoken to that friend since 7th grade, and he doesn't have any social media nor his parents. He transferred schools to California, and came back periodically, but never for long. I saw him during my 8th, 9th, 11th, and 12th grade years, but only for a day each time at school. I still don't know where he is, or if he's okay. The last I saw of someone in his family, it was his dad at a Walgreens, who looked beat up and tired from work with his son of about 4 years or so. I didn't approach him, as he seemed tired enough, and I didn't want to bother him. He was buying beer. Though he was kind of an alcoholic, he was a very nice guy even when drunk, though his alcoholism is what I believe led to him losing most of his jobs, thus causing them to move away as he was the only one who worked. They were traditional that way. I waited till they left and paid for my stuff. I should also mention that the next night when I returned home, my dad comes home from a trip to see his family that lives an hour away, and on that trip, he said he saw a giant blue light, much like the description of mine, just blue, flying away as he passed through the city of the main highway. As he unpacks his stuff, finally getting home, excited to tell us, he turns on the news, and sure enough, many other people saw it and called it in. 10. I have no way to explain this in a logical manner, so I guess I'll just go with what I know to be true. A few weeks ago, I was sitting in my medical sociology class. This is the most boring class I have ever taken. The professor is extraordinarily monotonous. We are not allowed to use our computers for note-taking, and there is very little student discussion. There are about 15 of us in the class, and we all sit around a table and listen to our professor talk. Now, I will let it be known that I am an extremely good student. I take very detailed notes, I pay incredible attention to whatever is being taught, and I generally like to know what is going on, even if I can barely stand to stay awake in the class. Usually, to get through this torturous hour and a half of class, I doodle in the margins of my notes, write down pretty much everything I can to keep from falling asleep, and fidget with my feet in an inconspicuous manner. In other words, I'm at least moving a bit. So again, a few weeks ago, I attend class as I normally do. The first 5 minutes is when I realized something was a bit off. I sat in my seat at the end of the table, directly across from the professor, and I seemed unable to move. Not just like unable to get up from my seat, but I seemed locked somehow. When I write that I did not blink, move my eyes a single millimeter, or so much as quiver for the whole hour and a half that I sat there. I have never been so serious in my life. I was a little scared, honestly, because even though I so badly wanted to stop making direct eye contact with my professor, I still sat, my arm locked under my chin, my eyes boring into his. After a while, he stopped looking at me completely. He seemed really thrown off that I wasn't even blinking at all, and my breathing was so smooth and so gentle that my body seemed as if it was a statue. In other words, it looked like I wasn't even inhaling. After a little while, my sight seemed to be somewhat impacted. Things in the room seemed to fade away and come back, kind of in waves. But I didn't even have the inability to look around to reset my vision. I think this happens when your eyes get tired, and the cones have already processed everything they can, so they just kind of stop working temporarily. I know I'm explaining that terribly, but it's the best I can do. I couldn't even close my eyes for a mere 5 seconds to rest them. I could have been a statue. The only way I can really think of it is that I was put on pause. The posture that I was holding should have also gotten tiring at some point, but my body was not registering anything. When the class was over, I was immediately out of the trance or whatever, and continued on with my night. Has this ever happened to anyone else? I just can't explain it. I didn't even know it was possible for a human to not blink for over an hour. 11. I work as a package delivery driver, not Amazon, a real delivery driver. Today, at the end of my route, I had these real high-end condos that have 10 buildings in total. To enter any building, you need a special key fob, so I started the delivery same as always. High number building to the lowest. Every time I deliver here, I park the same way, almost the same spots even, in between 2 buildings so I can hit 2 before moving my package car. Today I hit the 2 highest number ones, like usual, but the key fob was acting up, so after the second building I turned around and went to the guard shack for a new fob. Since I had to reverse to do it, I decided to run the rest of the buildings in reverse, from my usual plan to save from having to make 2 reverses. So after getting the new fob now, I went to the lowest 2 buildings and worked my way up. Long story short, once I got to my last building and ready to leave the condos, I noticed a package on the 4th floor. Confused because I didn't stop at that unit, I picked up the package and looked it over. Yep, all current labels for today came from my truck even. Then wait a second, what the hell? I delivered this package to the very first building. Did I screw up? Nope, shipping label is correct. Addressed to the first building, 4th floor. So basically I delivered a package at about 6:20 p.m. today. Then found the package in a different building at about 7:05. Told my supervisor and he said I must have gotten confused and had a long day, but nope. Due to the key fob issue, it's literally impossible because I found the package to my first building in my last building, which would have been my 3rd building if not for the key fob issue. Because when I got the new key fob and started going in reverse, the building that would have been my 3rd then became my last. So it's literally impossible that I left it in the wrong building, because it was literally the last building I stepped in before finding it there. Also, I checked my delivery history after finding it. The history was correct in my scanner. It was the first package I delivered in the very first building, where it was meant to be. So I'm guessing someone that lives there is a jerk and moved it. The unit on the shipping label was wrong, and the addressed unit knew where to take it. Or this fucking package teleports, i.e. a glitch. The next day I went there and my scanner quit working the moment I stopped my truck. The moving package was on a Thursday, and the randomly dead scanner was on a Friday. The guy that did the route on Monday said it happened to him too. Crazy shit. I took 2 scanners today, Tuesday, just in case, and didn't have any issues. Strange. 12. I have only owned 4 driver's licenses in my life. The first one I got when I was 15, 2 months before my birthday. I lived in Farmville at the time. I didn't like the photos, so I remember I waited for my birthday so I could get my hair done better, and take the photo again. I even threw my ID in the bushes so that I could pretend I lost it. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of my second card that I owned, because I didn't start taking pictures of my IDs until the 3rd one, when I realized that I lose my license a lot. The 3rd one I got when I moved to Centerville. Online, so I wouldn't have to take another photo because I really liked the photo that I had. Same thing with the 4th one. So I just want to establish that, out of all 4 driver's licenses that I've owned, only one of them has a different photo. I know what you're thinking, you're waiting for the glitch, and it's coming. I recently went to my grandmother's house a couple of weeks ago, and she lives in Maryland. I live in Virginia, so I don't really go out to see her that often, just because I'm focused on college and work. I left my fanny pack there, and it had my wallet in it. I called my grandmother, and she said that she found my ID on the dining table, but that my fanny pack was completely empty, so I don't really know what happened to the rest of my stuff. Decided to brush that off and just ask her to give whatever she could find to my mom, and we'll figure it out eventually. My mom went to go pick up my stuff and she came back with just my license. She told me that my grandmother wasn't there at the time and her roommate gave her what she could find. I grabbed the license and the first thing I noticed is that somebody put tape on top of it and then scribbled on it with a pen, as if they wanted to cover my face. I thought that was weird. I showed my mom and she thought that was very weird. Didn't think anything else of it. I pulled back the tape and that's when I got scared. The photo looked different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something looked weird about my photo. I went to my phone and I pulled up the recent picture of my license and the photos didn't match. It was at that time that I realized this was the first license that I've ever owned. Somehow, it had found its way out of Farmville to my grandmother's house and back to me. To say that I was spooked was the least of it. I can't even begin to think of how this would have ended up at my grandmother's house. 13. Before I tell this story, I need to clarify 3 things. First, I do not have any history of mental illness or illness of any sort, and neither does anyone related to me. And I was not under stress or pressure under the time these events occurred. Second, I do not take any medication of some sort. Third, I don't live in America, and I won't say where I live because that's my private information, but my school system is noticeably different than what most people here are used to. To the story. Where I live, you have the same class for every subject, so everyone does the same work. This spring in science class, I remember us doing only 2 chapters from the book, but apparently others don't. They insist that we also read about the human anatomy. Even the teachers in other classes do, which is extremely confusing. I even went and looked back to my previous saved work, and I had none about human anatomy. But others has stuff saved about it. We took the same class with the same teacher and at the same time. The teacher said I failed the test we had of it too. Everyone even made PowerPoints about it, but I remember no such thing. They all thought I was joking, and swore that they had seen me in class when we read about it, because where else would I be? I looked at an app that students have here that states your grades and upcoming stuff, and there was nothing about the human anatomy on my page. But for the others there was, even those others who had failed that test. I showed that to the teacher, but they just dismissed it as forgetting to write it in for me. But the thing is, this event made me think back to a couple of other unusual incidents this spring. After having the same easy and short password for my school iPad, it being my favorite fictional character's name for years, I suddenly couldn't access my iPad. I was doing something on my iPad for class, went to the restroom, came back, and I couldn't get in. Not even teachers have access to our passwords. I hadn't shared it with anyone. I didn't leave it open for someone to change, and I'm not close enough with anyone for them to know what my favorite character is. I hadn't mentioned it, or even brought any merch with me either. I had to go and get it fixed, but having to explain to my teachers why I couldn't turn in my work was awkward. The last thing that happened was that I went to my usual classroom to have my classes. A classroom that I had walked to hundreds of times before, that exact day and time. But sorry, suddenly it's not my classroom anymore, and another class has had their class there hundreds of times, that exact time and day. I looked at my schedule, and indeed, my class was not there. I had to run around looking for the correct classroom. This happened a couple times with different classes, mind you. I didn't have a near-death experience around that time either. I even went to the doctors, both to check out my mental and physical state, and there was nothing wrong with me. I just can't wrap my head around it. And the fact that this happened all in school, other than that, nothing else is out of the ordinary. 14. So this happened a while ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I'm 25 now. I was living near Montreal. I had a couple of friends. We were a couple of teens wanting to get scared. So we used to go in some abandoned houses and bring a Ouija board. Because, we were stupid. We got in trouble one time, so we stopped for a while. One day, one of my friends told me there was an abandoned hospital and primary school near the border of the states. So we got together again and went one night. It was a 1-hour drive. We were so excited. Backstory. So between 1940 and 1960, the Prime Minister Maurice Duplessis took all the orphan children and falsely declared them mentally ill, so they would be put in psychiatric hospitals. They are most known as the Orphelins Duplessis. They were beaten, raped, put in small rooms for days, some of them probably killed. So the Doria Institute was one of those places where it happened. Well, I won't tell you the complete story, but I'll let you do your research, because this is already getting long enough, but I assure you it is horrible. So yeah, we knew the stories about everything, so we were scared way before being there. At that time, I had a Canon camera, and was ready to take pictures. It was really hard finding the place because it was dark, and there's some streets named to trick curious people like us. Example, Doria Street near Daria Street, but I was on Doria, if I remember correctly. Finally, we find the place. It probably took us 1.5 hours driving around and around. So we get closer. I proceed to open my camera. I took the time to charge the battery before we left. There was a small school full of graffiti and broken windows, 2 floors. Then another big building, maybe 3 floors plus the basement. We decided to start with the school. To be honest, it was scary, and I'm a chicken. My friends were trying to act like it was nothing, so I did too. I took some pictures with the flash. So we finish our tour. We quit the school and proceed to walk to the hospital. I take one picture from outside, like maybe 25 feet away, then I approach the building with everyone. We find a big window with no glass, which I'm thinking is weird. We're inside. I swear it was so cold for a warm night of summer. I check my camera like maybe 2 seconds after I'm in. Nothing. It's not off or anything, it's just a white screen. I had chills, but my friend told me it was the battery. I must have forgot to charge it, etc. I nodded, but I knew they were wrong. We do the tour. I get really uncomfortable. Like a pressure on my chest, probably a panic attack. We leave the building. I get my breathing stable again, check my camera, no white screen. It was perfectly functional, battery was full. My friends now got really scared, nobody was trying to get tough. We left as fast as we could. I still have nightmares of the place. 15. Let's see. Snoop Dogg's album Doggy Style just came out, and myself, along with a few friends, were tucked away in some abandoned building drinking, you guessed it, gin and juice. It was late, right after midnight and a Tuesday during the summer break. A little context. My father worked for the government, and we were stationed overseas, and being the early 90s, our parents let us roam. We never got into trouble, just hung out and did teenager shit. But this night, we were out roaming a part of the city that had an abandoned factory. Beside this factory was an inner-city river outlet. My friend and I used to go into this outlet and hang out. This day, we decided to travel through the outlet and discovered the building. Behind this building was a house with the front end torn off. Like the front right side of the house was blown away. We didn't really pay any attention to it at first. After hanging out in the factory, drinking and smoking, one of my friends suggested we take a look at the house because from where we were in the factory, it looked like the house had a basement. So off we go. Dumb, drunk, naive teens, and almost immediately upon entering the house, we could smell baked dough. Whether it was bread or pizza dough, who knows? So the smell was not coming from the kitchen, cause there shouldn't be anyone here. For a moment, we panicked, and ran out cause maybe someone was living here. After about 4 cigarettes and calling each other pussies, we managed to go back, and after clearing the first floor, we decided to go into the basement. We called out the usual, "Hello, anyone there? We come in peace." I know, but I specifically remember this being said. We slowly creeped down the stairs, and although I don't remember any windows in the basement, we could see fairly decent while entering the room. The stairs came from the garage and kitchen, down to a basement that you could only enter by going left from the stairs once reaching the bottom. There was a pole dividing the basement, and towards the back was an open doorway that we could see into, and saw 2 more rooms, but they were dark. We ran out of the house again, repeat cigs and name-calling. We get a stick, and soak it in gin and some burlap from the warehouse, and make a torch. I know, dumb. After making our way to the basement's 2 back rooms, we finally light our torch. Fortunately, the torch burned out in about 2 minutes. But during this time we, for one, smelled the bread again, and 2, saw a small stairwell that led to a storm door to the outside. Now this is where things get weird. This is why I'm posting this. One of my friends went to open this door so we could see into the area better. Something happens before he opens the door that we will revisit later. But when he opened the door, the light in the room, or city, came in. After this happened, we could not smell the bread anymore. Also, my friend who had opened the door came back into the room and asked for us to take a look outside. He was a little freaked out. We didn't fully come out to the outside, but stayed in the stairwell, and it looked like we were out in the country. We could still see the house behind us, but ahead of us was a clearing, and a wood line that was maybe 100 feet away. And most importantly, no mountains. There were mountains where we were. Then all of us heard a woman speak in a different language, not native to the country we were in. She spoke like she was confused and startled. We booked it back into the basement, outside the front past the factory, and back into the river outlet. After trying to figure out an explanation to what we just saw, we decided to check the back of the house without going back into the basement. Sure enough, it was 100% obvious that there was a city behind this house. But we just wanted to be 1000% sure. We walked behind the house, saw a property line fence and the city. Then all of us did a 180 after one of us said, "Yep, fuck this," and hauled ass to one of our houses for the rest of the night. We went back the next day just to look again, and this is when my friend that opened the door said he heard voices and people walking right outside the door before opening it. And ever since this experience, I've noticed weird happenings that maybe I normally wouldn't. Like things either being remembered as happening or not happening when talking to people. I don't know, just weird. Anyway, I don't drink Seagram's gin anymore. And also would like to know, has something like this ever happened to anybody who might be listening to this? I'd sure like to discuss it. 16. I have nearly somehow, by some luck, mastered the art of controlling my dreams. All that I want shall be with limits, I have learned. I'm unable to do things that would raise my heartbeat too high, or that would require higher thinking. I can remember them vividly at least a week, then it's gone. The emotions remain, though. I don't enjoy waking up. Going back to bed is so enticing throughout the day. I do not remember every time, but I am sure it is common. For the screwy part is the issue. I've considered déjà vu, and that is the most likely answer to it all. Perhaps my brain interpreting things wrongly because of the lucidity of the dreams. I felt like it is still interesting to share, though. I appeal to an idea that if you believe in something truly and completely, you are able to influence it to happen. Not like saving the world or flight, but if you truly believed, with not a doubt in your mind nor subconscious, which is the real limiter, at all that it would happen. I have woken up on days, and felt for the most fleeting of moments such an immense despair on waking up that I can't will myself to get up again. I can remember joy and happiness. Some days I can remember the dreams themselves. I would talk to friends, drink alcoholic beverages, and joke with them, and they would laugh, I would laugh. The real world seems so drab in comparison. I have experienced these vivid memories from my dreams that have happened in real life. A few have happened in video games. I can distinctly remember hanging out with friends, drinking in my lucid dream, and the weekend it would end up the same. Please remember, I believe déjà vu to an extreme is the likely answer. This is not the only example, though, and is one of the more tame ones. I believe it is a possibility. Déjà vu to the extreme is more likely. That my conscious mind and subconscious mind are very much speaking to each other in these dreams, convincing each other of events. Or I could be a loony that has convinced himself they are special. The first one I remember follows. I was in middle school again, and admittedly I had a fairly sexual start. Areas were touched aplenty. Of course, it was a dream, though. I knew it was a dream, and I knew that I had to keep lucidity. I stopped myself from bringing my brain to full course, and just walked. I walked for a long time. I came back to the middle school, and a security guard was there. We did not have a security guard in middle school. He was black and wore your average attire, a radio, jeans, and a white shirt. No gun, no spray, nor baton. He had the warmest smile. It felt like greeting an old friend that you forgot about years ago. I actually teared up typing this part, I don't know why. I walked to him, and I don't remember what was said, but once again we walked. If my memory recalls correctly, we walked for a long time, although this happened a long time ago. I remember feeling sad about things, then a feeling of acceptance. Then my friend joined me, and the man dissipated. I remember talking even longer to them. The odd part is I can remember a little bit about it. I remember talking about my family, and how long I had been in the dream. I woke up then. I remembered it all that day, but I have long, probably, forgotten a large portion. 17. I've been going through a lot. Lost my job and my apartment, and I've been coasting, trying to find a better way to do things so I don't end up back here if things don't work out again. Some days are easier. I don't always feel like I failed at everything. But some days are just spirals of, what have I done to my life? How did I get so far away from who I am? I can't afford therapy. And my best friend, partner, but we're on a break, is out of town doing the exact thing I wish I was doing with my life. So I turn inward and I drink. I don't black out. Just enough to make me tired or make me cry, or stop me from feeling anything. This morning at like 8:30, after waking up around 6 and being unsuccessful in getting back to sleep, I refer to alcohol, like 2 shots of vodka, for help. I had the brilliant idea to take a bath, something I'd frequently indulged in, but had no opportunity to do so in recent months. But I stayed with my mother last night, and she has a bathtub, so I filled up the bath, put in a bath bomb, slid in, and relaxed for a moment before things got hazy. It's kind of like I drifted down into a comfortable position, took a few deep breaths, closed my eyes. Things just relaxed into nothing for a moment. My thoughts drifted, and suddenly the water felt lukewarm. I shifted, and my body ached like I had been in that position too long. But it had just been a few minutes, I thought. My hands were pruned beyond recognition. I felt strangely light, and the alcohol had worn off. I'm pretty sure my dumbass just fell asleep slightly drunk, and woke up without realizing it. It just didn't feel like waking up. I know what it feels like to wake up from an accidental nap, and it's not like that. I fumbled for a moment to actually finish my bath, checked the time, 11:47 a.m. Over 3 hours in the bath. Can you sleep in water for that long without drowning, or sliding so you wake yourself up? Still tired and now super confused. I lay down in bed and set an alarm for a couple hours later. I don't actually remember much of my transition to bed after leaving the bathtub. I felt strange and dizzy now, though I had felt wonderful after waking up, and fell asleep to wake up at 4:18, late for literally everything. Everything feels weird too, like I'm walking through a lucid dream and I haven't figured out which things are different from real life. I find myself looking for subtle differences. I must just be overreacting. My drinking is becoming a solution to my problems instead of fun. And maybe I just felt myself truly realize that. Maybe I feel light from finally getting enough sleep for the first time in weeks. Maybe the things that have been tumbling around in my brain as I tumble around this rock tumbler that has become my life are finally starting to sort themselves out, and I feel a subconscious chaos leaving me. But I can't shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere else, I'm still lying in that bathtub, not breathing, waiting to be found by my mother. 18. About a year ago in autumn, I was in a car with my grandparents as they were driving me home. Near my hometown, we drove by a crosswalk, and near the crosswalk, I saw a man who lived quite near my family, and was also a friend of my parents and grandparents. Let's say his name is Joe, so it's easier to tell this. So Joe smiled and waved to us, but my grandparents didn't wave back, and I found that really odd because, after all, they knew the man and were friends with him. However, I didn't say anything because I thought that maybe they had a reason not to wave. All in all, it was pretty odd. And it wasn't that my grandparents hadn't seen him because I saw my granddad looking in his direction, and it was nearly impossible not to notice him. Well, we get to my home, and I forget the whole thing for a while. Fast forward about a week, when me, my parents, and my grandparents are at my grandparents' house. Our discussion turns to Joe as my dad said that he hasn't seen him for a long time, even though he usually sees him almost daily. Then I remember the incident and decide to say that I had seen Joe a week before, and I also asked why didn't my grandparents wave to him. They said that they hadn't seen him. I stated that he was at the crosswalk a week ago, and he clearly waved to us. But then they dropped the bomb. They say that Joe has been at the hospital for over a month, because he can't really move or do anything due to an aggressive cancer that has spread widely. I claimed that it was him who I saw, but my grandparents said that it was not possible, because he hasn't been able to leave the hospital. I swear that the man I saw was Joe, and I can recognize him easily because he has a bushy beard and overall looks quite unique. Then a couple more weeks passed by, and I saw Joe again as I was jogging outside. He was walking towards me, quite near his house. He saw me and nodded as a greeting. I also nodded, but didn't stop. Just kept jogging. I'm sure it was him and no one else because I saw him quite close up. I was wondering how could he be there if he was so sick, but I thought that maybe he was a bit better now and could visit his home finally. I didn't really bother my head too much after that. Well, a little later, a couple days or so, me, my parents, and grandparents were at the same place again. We talked about familiar people who had passed away recently, and then I hear my grandmother say that Joe had passed away almost a week ago. She told me that he had been so sick that he couldn't eat, drink, or even breathe properly, and the cancer had took over. I was in utter shock. How on earth was it possible that I had seen Joe a couple days ago, if he was already dead? I was terrified, and I told everyone I had seen him, but they didn't believe me, and just kind of laughed it off. They said it was probably someone else I saw, but I swear it was Joe. I am 100% sure I saw Joe 2 times when he should have been in the hospital, and later dead. This is still creeping me out, and I haven't told this to anybody else because I fear the same reaction my family had. 19. These might be glitches, or maybe it's just a bad memory. One afternoon I fixed myself some lunch while at home. I usually sit on my bed listening to stories while eating. I ate some of my food and felt thirsty, so I went back to the kitchen, took a glass, put 2 ice cubes and filled it halfway with some juice. I went back to my bedroom and put the glass on my side table. I settled back in my bed, put the plate in my lap, pressed play on the video, and turned to take a drink. I paused for a moment because now I had 2 exact glasses of juice. They were the same glass, same 2 ice, and same amount. I was very puzzled. I searched through my memory to find when I could have gotten that first drink. Also, why is it I did not see the first glass of juice when I put the second one down? I am still scratching my head with this one. Another thing that happened to me happened in April. My TV was on a popular American news channel. The volume was low. I was on my tablet, so just glancing now and again at the TV. I looked up at the TV and saw a photo of a young lady. I thought to myself, oh, they have a follow-up of that lady who had her baby cut out of her some years ago. So I turned up the volume to hear what they were reporting, but to my surprise, this just happened. What? I was confused. But I remember watching this story some years earlier. I remember the photo. I remembered how terrible that was. And why would someone do something so wicked? I went online to search for stories of this type to see if I mixed it up with another one. I found some similar stories, but none that matched the photo of her story. This is very strange for me. 20. For as long as I can remember, I have experienced some very strange moments, which I have certainly already dreamt. Before you think it, this is not your usual déjà vu. I also experienced déjà vu, and the feeling is not the same. Most of the situations or stories that I remember are very mundane. No big life-changing events like saving someone's life or avoiding a car crash. Let me go back to one of my earliest memories of this happening. I would have been around 12, and I was in my parents' kitchen getting a bowl of cereal, Rice Krispies to be exact. I poured the cereal, and then spooned a little sugar on top, and then moved to the island and poured some milk. I distinctly remember noticing the light through the flowers in the window as I passed, carrying my bowl with both hands. The entire action was an actual dream of mine about 2 months prior. As you can probably imagine, my 12-year-old brain was thoroughly blown. From then, I noticed it happened more frequently, perhaps once every 3 to 4 months or so. Always little mundane tasks like the aforementioned. However, when I was around 14, I had an extremely weird experience with a friend of mine. Sat either side of a fairly wide pathway through a park, where admittedly we spent a lot of our weekends. We had an entire conversation knowing exactly what each of us would say. Maybe unsurprisingly, it was mostly about us having dreamt the conversation before. But it was a very weird experience. Between replies, I remember thinking to myself, why don't I just get up and walk over to her? Then, not being capable of standing up. I'm not entirely sure if that was a physical inability, or partly a conscious thought of not being able to move until the memory had played out in full. Following that, I had at least 2 other occasions that both this particular friend and I previously dreamt a few moments of life playing out in front of us. These experiences quieted down, and happened less frequently in the following years, ranging from being 2 months apart to over a year until the next. I have always wondered what this experience actually is. Are we in a simulation and it's glitching out? Did I already live this life and I'm momentarily remembering it happening last time? Allow me to clarify a few points I feel people will likely question because I've even questioned myself. The time taken for the dream to become reality can range from around 1 month to over a year. I don't believe I've ever had one take over 2 years to happen, though. I don't keep these dreams as a big part of my memory, so it's not often that I'll remember or think about that last dream I had long after I've dreamt them, though that did happen a few times during my early teens. I do remember the dreams the next morning and up to the following week for most dreams. I've told people about these dreams and have been with them when they became reality, and they have remembered something about me telling them at the time. The examples I have given, I feel I remember perfectly down to the most little details. I could describe 95% of my surroundings in both situations. I don't seem to be able to pull up many of the other memories in full. However, I have vague recollections of where some of these have happened, but not the actions or conversation itself. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Glitch Monthly number 3, aka Better Late Than Never, and thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story yourself, you can pop it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. You can find that in the description of pretty much every video. Right, since this one was late, I'm not 100% sure on when the next one will be. I will get to work on it this week anyway. I have a few more weeks worth of stories to send out. And if I happen to gather 20, which is what I prefer to do, doesn't have to be 20, but that's what I prefer, then I will try and get it out. Let's see. You'll get this on the 10th, which is actually when I'm recording it. And the next one really should go up on the 31st. Right. The next one actually goes up on Halloween. I was going to do something else on Halloween, so we might push it back a week at most, or a week early. I'm not sure which. We'll see what I can do. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.